Good evening. Tonight, we journey into the magical world of 1001 Nights. We are here to hear the tale of Sindbad the Sailor, a man of courage, adventure, and mystery. Through 7 daring voyages, Sindbad braves enchanted seas. He travels to unknown lands. He faces wonders and challenges alike. Let this timeless story guide you gently to rest as we set sail into dreams. Close your eyes, take a deep breath, and let the adventure begin. During the time of Caliph Harun al-Rashid, there lived a poor porter named Hindbad in Baghdad. One scorching day, he was tasked with carrying a heavy load across the city. Before he was even halfway there, he grew so weary that he decided to rest. He found himself in a quiet street where the pavement was sprinkled with rose water and a cool breeze was blowing. Setting his burden down, he sat in the shade of a grand house. Soon, he realized he couldn't have picked a better spot. A delightful scent of exotic woods and sweet spices drifted from the open windows, mixing with the fragrance of the rose water rising from the warm pavement. From inside the mansion, he heard music played on many instruments. Along with the cheerful songs of birds, the aroma of delicious dishes reached him, making it clear that a feast was underway. Curious about who lived in such a magnificent house he'd never seen before, on a street he rarely visited, he approached some elegantly dressed servants at the door. He asked one of them who the master of the house was. "What?" the servant replied. "You live in Baghdad and don't know that this is the home of the noble Sindbad the Sailor, the famous traveler who has sailed every sea under the sun." Hearing this, the porter felt a surge of envy towards someone whose life seemed so happy compared to his own miserable existence. Looking up to the sky, he exclaimed, "Great creator of all things, consider the difference between Sindbad's life and mine. Every day, I face countless hardships just to earn enough stale bread to keep myself and my family alive. Meanwhile, Sindbad spends money freely and enjoys the finest things in life. What has he done to deserve such a pleasant life? And what have I done to deserve such a hard one?" With that, he stamped his foot in frustration, overwhelmed by misery and despair. Just then, a servant came out of the palace. Taking him by the arm, he said, "Come with me. My master, the noble Sindbad, wishes to speak with you." Hindbad was surprised by this invitation. He feared that his careless words had offended Sindbad, so he tried to excuse himself, saying he couldn't leave the load he'd been entrusted with out on the street. But the servant assured him that it would be taken care of and urged him to come inside. Finally, Hindbad agreed. He followed the servant into a vast room where many guests were seated around a table laden with all sorts of delicacies. At the head of the table sat a tall, dignified man with a long white beard that gave him a wise appearance. Behind his chair stood attendants ready to serve him. This was the famous Sindbad himself. Feeling more nervous than ever amid such splendor, the porter greeted the company with a trembling voice. Sindbad gestured for him to come closer and invited him to sit at his right hand. He personally placed choice morsels on Hindbad's plate and poured him a cup of excellent wine. When the meal was ending, he spoke to him kindly, asking his name and occupation. "My lord," the porter replied, "my name is Hindbad." "I am glad to meet you," Sindbad said. "I'm sure everyone here feels the same, but I wish to ask you about something I heard you say outside." Sindbad had overheard his complaint while passing by the open window before the feast began, which is why he had sent for him. At this, Hindbad felt ashamed and lowered his head. He replied, "My lord, I admit that I was overcome by weariness and frustration, and I spoke unwisely. I beg your forgiveness." "Oh," Sindbad replied, "don't think I'm upset with you. In fact, I understand your situation and feel for you. It seems you might have the wrong idea about me, and I'd like to clear that up. You probably think I've gained all this wealth and luxury without any effort or hardship, but that's far from the truth. I've reached this comfortable life only after years of facing every kind of toil and danger. Yes, my friends," he continued, addressing the guests, "I assure you that my adventures have been so strange and challenging that they might discourage even the most determined people from seeking fortune by sailing the seas. Since you may have heard only bits and pieces about my 7 voyages and the incredible experiences I've had on land and sea, I'll now share with you the full and true stories. I think you'll enjoy hearing them. My father was a wealthy and respected merchant in Baghdad. When he passed away while I was still a child, he left me all his riches. As I grew into adulthood, I spent my inheritance freely, living in luxury and keeping company with the richest young men of the city. For many years, I enjoyed this carefree life, giving little thought to the future. But eventually, reason took hold, and I was dismayed to find that I had squandered my fortune. Determined to rebuild my life, I sold the few possessions I had left, which fetched me 3,000 pieces of silver. I decided to use this money wisely. I purchased goods suitable for trade in distant lands and gathered supplies I would need for my travels. With everything prepared, I joined a group of merchants and set sail on a ship bound for the city of Basra. For days and nights, we sailed the open sea, visiting one island after another. Everywhere we went, we traded, bought, and sold goods. One day, we arrived at an island unlike any we had seen before. It looked like a garden from paradise itself, floating upon the sea. Our ship anchored and we went ashore. Fires were lit, and while some cooked meals, others washed in cool streams or admired the island's beauty. After we had eaten, the shore became a lively scene of games and laughter, and I joined in the fun. Suddenly, a cry from the ship's captain ended our merriment. Standing on the deck, he shouted, "Hear me, and may God preserve you. Hurry back and leave everything. Save yourselves from sudden death. This is not an island, but a giant whale that has been sleeping on the surface of the sea for ages. Your fires and dancing have woken it, and it's beginning to move. If it dives back into the depths, you will surely drown. Hurry and save yourselves." All of us immediately dropped everything and ran toward the ship, desperate to escape with our lives. As we scrambled to safety, the island began to stir and then sank beneath the waves, causing the sea to churn violently. I was pulled underwater and thought all was lost. But by God's grace, I surfaced and found a large wooden bowl floating nearby, one that some passengers had brought ashore for washing. Clinging to it, I managed to stay afloat, battling the wild waves with my hands and feet. I called out to the captain, but he couldn't hear me. He had already set sail, believing that those who hadn't made it back were lost forever. Clinging to the wooden bowl, I watched the ship disappear over the horizon. Night fell, and I prepared myself for death. Perhaps I fainted. For the next thing I remember is finding myself washed ashore on a mountainous island. Overhead, trees stretched their branches, and I grabbed hold of a low-hanging limb to pull myself out of the water. My limbs were numb, and when I looked at my legs, I saw marks where fish had nibbled at them. I marveled at having survived such dangers. Exhausted, I dragged myself onto the beach and collapsed like a dead man. I remained there until dawn, when the rising sun awakened me to a state of weakness I had never known before. It took a long time before I could even sit up, and longer still to crawl on my hands and knees to a grassy spot shaded from the sun. There, I rested and eventually found a brook of clear water. After drinking deeply and eating some delicious fruits I found nearby, my strength began to return. For several days, I wandered the island, marveling at its wonders and regaining my health. One day, as I was exploring, I noticed something unusual in the distance. It looked like a giant wild animal, and I approached cautiously, fearing it might be some fearsome beast. As I got closer, I was amazed to see that it was a beautiful mare, standing tall with her mane and tail flowing in the breeze. She was tethered to a stake near the shore. When she saw me, she neighed loudly and stamped her hooves. Before I could react, a man emerged from a nearby cave and hurried toward me. He called out, asking who I was and what I was doing there. I told him my story, leaving out no detail, even mentioning the wooden bowl that had saved my life. Hearing this, joy spread across his face. "Come with me," he said, taking my hand. He led me into his cave and offered me food, which I ate gratefully. Once I was comfortable, I recounted my tale more thoroughly, and he listened with wonder. After I finished, I asked him, "Now that you know my story, please tell me who you are and why you are here, living in a cave with a mare tethered outside." He smiled and replied, "I am one of the grooms of King Mirag. My companions and I are stationed around this island. You see, it's the time of the new moon when the sea stallions rise from the ocean. We bring our finest mares here and tether them by the shore to attract the sea stallions so we can capture them." As he explained this clever plan, a magnificent sea stallion emerged from the waves, shaking foam from its crest and neighing loudly. As it approached, the groom quickly pulled me into the cave and took up a sturdy rope. With great skill, he looped the rope around the sea stallion, restraining and calming it. Then, leading both the mare and the captured stallion, he said, "Come with me." We went to meet his fellow grooms, who, after hearing my story, agreed that I should accompany them to the king's city. They provided me with a horse, and together we traveled to the royal palace. Upon our arrival, they went in to see King Mihrag and told him about my extraordinary adventures. The king sent for me, and I was brought before him. He greeted me warmly and asked me to share my story. After I recounted everything, he was amazed and exclaimed, "By Allah, you are truly favored by fate. How else could you have escaped such great dangers? Praise God for your deliverance." He treated me with great kindness and appointed me as an overseer of the harbor, and the ships came and went. My status quickly rose, and I became a trusted advisor in his court. For a long time, I served the king faithfully, and he rewarded me generously. Yet despite my success, my thoughts often turned to Baghdad, the city of peace. I asked merchants and travelers about the way back to my homeland, but none had ever heard of such a place. Time passed, and though the island was filled with wonders, wonders that would amaze you if I had time to tell them all, I grew weary. I longed to see my family again. One day, as I stood on the shore, a large ship arrived, and merchants began to unload their goods. As the harbor master, I went to record their merchandise. I asked the ship's captain if this was all their cargo. Yes, except for some bales belonging to a merchant who drowned during our voyage, he replied. I'm holding them to sell on behalf of his family in Baghdad. At the mention of my beloved city, my heart leapt. What was the merchant's name? I asked eagerly. His name was Sindbad the Sailor, the captain said. He perished tragically on our journey here. Hearing this, I looked closely at the captain and recognized him. Captain, I exclaimed, I am Sindbad the Sailor. Those goods are mine. But he didn't believe me. We saw Sindbad drown with our own eyes, he insisted. You're just trying to claim his goods. I realized he needed proof. Let me tell you things only Sindbad would know, I said. I then recounted events from the voyage, small details and incidents that only someone who had been there could possibly know. The captain and the merchant stared at me in disbelief. Then, joyfully, they recognized me. By Allah, they exclaimed, we thought you were lost forever, but here you are, alive. They embraced me and congratulated me on my miraculous survival. The captain returned my goods, and I was overjoyed. Everyone shared in my happiness. Remembering the kindness of King Mirage, I selected the finest items from my bales and presented them to him as gifts. He was astonished by my good fortune and graciously accepted my offerings. In return, he bestowed upon me even greater gifts. After selling the rest of my goods for a handsome profit, I purchased rare merchandise from the city. When the ship was ready to depart, I went to the king to express my deep gratitude for all he had done for me and to ask his permission to leave. He gave me his blessing and sent me on my way with additional precious gifts. With all my belongings safely loaded onto the ship, I set sail for home. The voyage was smooth, and favorable winds carried us swiftly to Basra. From there, I made my way back to Baghdad. My family and friends welcomed me with open arms, overjoyed to see me again. When I sold the treasures I had brought back, I found myself wealthier than ever before. I bought houses and land, and I surrounded myself with good friends. In their company, I soon forgot the dangers and hardships I had endured. Such is the story of my first voyage. Tomorrow, by God's grace, I will tell you the remarkable adventures of my second voyage. As I shared with you yesterday, I was living comfortably in Baghdad, surrounded by friends and enjoying all the pleasures life could offer. Yet, after some time, I felt the call of the sea once more. The desire to explore unknown lands and the need to replenish my dwindling wealth urged me to embark on a second voyage. Without delay, I gathered suitable merchandise for trade and made my way to the river. Quietly and without telling anyone, I boarded a fine ship, well-rigged and manned by a large crew. Alongside other merchants, we set sail, and the wind filled our sails as we journeyed from island to island and sea to sea. At every place we anchored, we bought, sold, and traded goods. One day, we arrived at an uninhabited island of breathtaking beauty. Trees filled with ripe fruits shaded the land, and brightly colored birds flitted among the branches, their songs filling the air. Rare flowers perfumed the breeze, and clear streams flowed throughout the island. We marveled at the wonders of this place, which seemed like a piece of paradise set upon the sea. Choosing a serene spot by a stream, I sat apart from the others, reflecting on the marvelous works of the Almighty. The gentle winds rustling through the trees and the murmuring waters at my feet lulled me into a peaceful sleep. When I awoke later, I looked out to sea and was shocked to see that the ship was a distant speck on the horizon. They had forgotten me and sailed away, leaving me alone on the island. Despair overwhelmed me as I realized my predicament. I thought to myself, though I escaped dangers before when all seemed lost, this time there may be no escape. I regretted leaving my comfortable life in Baghdad to embark on this journey. Here, I had no food, no drink, no fine clothes, no gold, nothing but myself and this deserted island. Driven nearly mad by my thoughts, I began to run aimlessly across the island, hoping to find some way out of my dire situation. Eventually, I climbed a tall tree to survey my surroundings. In every direction, there was only sky, sea, trees, and streams. But then, something unusual caught my eye, a large, white object in the distance. Curious, I decided to find out what it was. After climbing down from the tree, I made my way toward the mysterious sight. When I reached it, I was astonished to find a gigantic, smooth, white structure that gleamed in the sunlight. It was unlike anything I had ever seen. I walked around it looking for a door or an opening, but found none. It was perfectly smooth and had a circumference of about 100 feet. As I pondered this strange object, the sky suddenly darkened. Looking toward the sinking sun, I saw that it was obscured by a massive black shape, an unusual sight during the summer season. As I watched, the object drew nearer, and I realized it was not a cloud, but a colossal bird flying swiftly toward the island. It was so large that it blocked out the sun. I remember tales from travelers about a gigantic bird called the roc, which was said to dwell on certain islands and feed its young with elephants. I realized that the enormous white structure before me must be one of this bird's eggs. Marveling at this wonder, I stood in awe. Soon the gigantic bird descended and settled over the egg, spreading its wings and settling down to sleep. Seeing an opportunity to escape the island, I untied my turban and twisted it into a rope. Carefully, I approached the bird and fastened one end of the turban securely around its leg, tying the other end around my waist. I hoped that when it flew away, it would carry me with it to some inhabited land. All night long, I lay awake beneath the bird, anxious about my plan. At dawn, the bird awoke with a loud cry, rose from the egg, and soared into the sky, carrying me along. Higher and higher we went, until the island was just a tiny speck below. Then, in wide circles, the bird began to descend and finally landed on a high plateau. As soon as we touched down, I quickly untied myself from the bird's leg and hurried away, fearing it might notice me. From a safe distance, I watched as the bird caught a huge serpent in its beak and flew off toward the sea. Now free from the bird, but stranded on this desolate plateau, I looked around. On one side was a deep valley, and on the other, steep mountains that seemed impossible to climb. I realized that while I had escaped the island, I was now in another dire situation. There was no food or water, and no apparent way out. With no other choice, I decided to descend into the valley. As I made my way down, I noticed that the ground was covered with diamonds of remarkable size. But my awe quickly turned to fear when I saw enormous serpents coiled among the rocks, serpents so large that they could easily swallow a man whole. They were camouflaged against the ground, making it difficult to spot them until you were very close. I stepped carefully, doing my best not to disturb them. Suddenly, a large piece of fresh meat fell from above, landing with a thud nearby. This startled me, but then I recalled a story I had heard long ago. In a land filled with diamonds, guarded by deadly serpents, merchants had devised a clever way to obtain the precious stones. They would throw chunks of meat into the valley. The diamonds would stick to the meat, and giant birds, like the roc, would swoop down to grab the meat and carry it back to their nests on the mountaintops. The merchants would then scare away the birds and collect the diamonds from the meat. Realizing that this was exactly what was happening, I devised a plan to escape. First, I gathered as many large diamonds as I could carry, placing them carefully in my pockets and wrapping them in my clothes. Then I tied the piece of meat securely around myself. Not long after, a giant bird swooped down, seized the meat along with me, and flew to the top of the mountain. As soon as the bird landed and began tearing at the meat, I quickly freed myself. Startled by my sudden appearance, the bird flew away. At that moment, a merchant approached, surprised to see me. He had been waiting to collect the diamonds from the meat. When he saw that there were none, he was disappointed and began to lament his misfortune. I approached him and said, "Do not be upset. I have many fine diamonds here, some larger than any you've seen. Let us share in this good fortune." He was overjoyed and thanked me profusely. Soon, other merchants gathered around, and when they heard my story, they were amazed. They said, "You are truly favored by fate, for no one has ever ventured into the valley and lived to tell the tale." We rested for the night, and the next morning, we set out together. We journeyed over the mountains and eventually reached the seashore, where boats awaited us. We sailed to a nearby island, rich with camphor trees so large that 100 men could stand in their shade. The island was also home to wild animals, including the fearsome rhinoceros. As we traveled from island to island, we traded our diamonds for precious goods. Eventually, I parted ways with the merchants and continued my journey alone. After many adventures and much trading, I finally arrived at Basra with a wealth of goods. From there, I returned to Baghdad, the city of peace, and reunited with my family. I sold my merchandise for a great profit and found myself wealthier than ever. I resumed my life of comfort, surrounding myself with friends and enjoying all the pleasures that wealth could provide. This is the story of my second voyage. By God's grace, tomorrow I will share with you the even more remarkable adventures that befell me on my third voyage. After spending some time in Baghdad, enjoying every comfort and delight, I once again felt the urge to travel. The call of the sea and the desire to trade drew me back to adventure. My fortune had diminished due to my generous spending, so I decided to embark on a third voyage to restore my wealth and satisfy my restless spirit. I gathered a large stock of merchandise and headed to Basra, where I joined a ship filled with merchants and men of high standing. We set sail and journeyed for many days, buying and selling goods as we visited various islands. One day, while we were in the open ocean, a violent storm struck. The wind howled and the waves tossed our ship, blowing us off course. For a day and a night, we were at the mercy of the storm. When morning came, the wind calmed and the captain surveyed our surroundings. Suddenly, he cried out in despair and tore at his beard. "May God help us," he exclaimed. "The storm has driven us to disaster. That is the mountain of monkeys. No one who approaches it ever escapes." We looked and saw a high mountain on an island. As we watched, wondering what danger awaited us, we saw that the sea around us was swarming with monkeys that had swum out from the island. They were small but fierce, with hideous faces, and there were so many of them that we couldn't fight them off. They clambered up the sides of the ship, biting through the ropes with their sharp teeth. The sails became useless, and the ship drifted toward the shore. Once we reached land, the monkeys forced us off the ship. Then they returned on board. repaired the ropes, set the sails, and sailed away, leaving us stranded. We realized that we were in a dire situation. Sailors feared this island, and no ship would dare come near to rescue us. We wandered through the island, eating fruit and drinking from streams. Eventually, we came upon an open area where a huge house stood. Its walls and massive ebony doors were incredibly tall. The doors were open, so we entered and found everything inside was enormous. Cooking pots big enough to boil an ox hung over a giant fireplace, and a colossal couch stood at the far end, so large that 100 men could sit on it comfortably. But the place was empty, so we rested for a while and then fell asleep. Around sunset, we were jolted awake by a loud noise and the ground trembling beneath us. A gigantic figure entered the room from the far end. He looked like a man, but was enormous in size. His skin was black, his eyes blazed like fire, and two sharp tusks protruded from his wide mouth. His ears drooped to his shoulders and his nails were like claws. We were terrified and couldn't move as he approached the couch and settled his huge body onto it. Then he turned his head and spotted us. Rising from the couch, he walked toward us. I was closest to him, and he grabbed me, turning me over in his enormous hand to examine me. Thankfully, I was lean from the hardships I'd endured, so he set me down. He did the same with the others until he found the fattest among us, the captain of our ship. Realizing what was about to happen, we watched in horror as the giant took our captain, roasted him over a fire, and ate him. Afterwards, he threw the bones onto a heap in the corner, lay down on the couch, and fell asleep. His snoring was like thunder. We fled from the house in terror, feeling that death by drowning or at the hands of the monkeys would be better than being eaten by this giant. But with no place to hide and no ship to escape on, we were helpless. Strangely, despite our fear, we returned to the giant's house, perhaps hoping that a solution would present itself. Exhausted, we fell asleep. Once again, we were awakened by the giant's arrival. He chose another of our group, ate him, and went to sleep. Desperate to escape this fate, we devised a plan. "Let's kill him," one of us suggested. I agreed but cautioned, if we try to kill him, we must first prepare a way to escape. Let's build rafts to carry us away from the island if our plan fails. They agreed, and we gathered sturdy pieces of wood, carrying them to the shore where we constructed several rafts. We stocked them with fruit and water, ready for a quick departure. Then we returned to the giant's house to carry out our plan. While he was sleeping, we heated 2 sharp iron spits in the fire until they were red hot. Then we carefully approached the giant and thrust the glowing points into his eyes. He awoke with a terrifying roar, clutching at his face as we scattered in all directions. Blind and enraged, he stumbled around but couldn't find us. Eventually, he found the door and rushed outside, screaming in pain. We hurried to the shore and launched our rafts. Just as we pushed off, we saw the giant returning, led by an even larger and more hideous figure, a female giant. They began hurling huge rocks at us. Many of our companions were struck and killed, but a few of us managed to escape into the open sea. Exhausted and relieved, we drifted until we reached another island. Thinking we were safe at last, we fell asleep on the shore. But our troubles were not over. We awoke to find a giant serpent coiling itself around us. It seized one of our friends and swallowed him whole, bones cracking as it consumed him. Horrified, another companion and I fled. That night, we decided to sleep in a tall tree to avoid the serpent. We climbed high and secured ourselves among the branches using our turbans. But the serpent was cunning. It found us, slithered up the tree, and swallowed my remaining companion as I watched in terror. When morning came, I descended, shaken and alone. Despairing, I considered throwing myself into the sea to escape this nightmare. But then an idea came to me. I gathered driftwood and fashioned protective boards. I tied one piece across my chest, another across my back, and one on each side. I also secured pieces to my feet and head. That evening, when the serpent approached, it couldn't wrap itself around me or swallow me because of the wooden barriers. Frustrated, it tried all night, but eventually gave up when dawn broke. Grateful to have survived, I wandered the island until, to my great joy, I spotted a ship passing nearby. I waved frantically, using my turban to signal for help. The crew saw me and sent a boat to bring me aboard. They listened in amazement as I recounted my harrowing experiences and welcomed me warmly. They gave me clean clothes and food, and I felt hope returning. As we continued our journey, we stopped at an island known for its sandalwood. The other merchants went ashore to trade, but I had nothing left. Seeing my plight, the ship's captain approached me. "I have some goods belonging to a merchant we lost during the voyage," he said. "You can sell them here. It will share the profits with his family when we return to Baghdad. In return, you'll earn a portion for your efforts." I gratefully agreed. When the goods were brought up, I was stunned to see that they were my own. Recognizing the markings, I exclaimed, "These are my goods! I am Sindbad the Sailor." The captain and the merchants were astonished. Some doubted me, so I recounted events from our earlier journey, reminding the captain of conversations we'd had. Finally convinced, they rejoiced at my return. One merchant who had met me during my second voyage confirmed my identity and said, "This man speaks the truth. Let us thank God for his safe return." With my goods restored, I traded with the islanders and acquired new wealth. We visited many more places, buying and selling, until we finally returned to Basra. From there, I went back to Baghdad, where I was reunited with my family and friends. Surrounded by comfort and enjoying the fruits of my adventures, I soon forgot the hardships I'd endured. But the allure of the sea and the promise of new experiences beckoned me once more. And so, my friends, I found myself preparing for a fourth voyage. Tomorrow, if you wish, I will share the incredible tales of that journey with you. After living comfortably in Baghdad for some time, surrounded by happiness and good friends, I felt the familiar urge to travel once more. I longed to see new places, meet different people, and trade goods to restore my wealth. So, I gathered many valuable items and set sail from Basra on a large ship with other merchants who shared my ambition. For many days, our journey was pleasant as we sailed among various islands, buying and selling along the way. Everything went well until we ventured into the open sea. There, a powerful wind rose against us. The waves grew taller as the storm intensified, and soon we were in great danger. The gale tore our sails and snapped our masts, and water began to flood the ship. Slowly, the vessel started to sink. Many of us feared the worst, and as the waves crashed over us, several of my companions were lost. In the midst of the chaos, I was fortunate to cling to a large wooden plank. Others nearby were struggling to stay afloat, and I helped them reach the plank. Together, we held on tightly, battered by wind and waves. For an entire day and night, we drifted on the stormy sea, sometimes plunging into deep valleys of water, other times lifted high on towering waves. At dawn the next day, the sea cast us, exhausted, onto the shore of an island. We lay there for hours, too weak to move. Eventually, our strength began to return, and we managed to stand and explore the island. We found plenty of fruits and fresh water, which revived us. That night, we slept on the beach, and in the morning, feeling stronger, we decided to venture further inland. As we explored, we came upon a large building. Curious about who might live there, we approached the entrance. Suddenly, a group of native people emerged. They wore no clothes and did not speak to us, but they seized us and led us inside to a spacious hall where we were brought before their leader. He gestured for us to sit, and they offered us food unlike anything we had seen before. My companions ate eagerly, but I felt uneasy and ate only a little. This caution would later save me from a terrible fate. As my companions ate, they seemed to become more and more ravenous, consuming large amounts of the strange food. Then they were given cups of coconut oil to drink. After drinking it, their eyes took on a glazed look, and they continued to eat in a frenzied manner, which was frightening to behold. I grew fearful, realizing that something was very wrong. I remembered tales of certain tribes who captured travelers, feeding them unusual foods to make them lose their senses and fatten them up. Once the travelers became dull and heavy, they would meet a grim fate. I feared that my companions were falling victim to this. While I grew thinner from eating little and being anxious, my companions became lethargic and dull. Eventually, they were treated like livestock, led out to graze by a herder. Seeing that no one paid attention to me, I decided to escape. One night, I slipped away into the surrounding forest. The next morning, unsure of what dangers lay ahead, I wandered through the island, surviving on edible plants and herbs. Around midday, I came upon a green meadow where I saw, with great sorrow, my former companions grazing aimlessly under the watchful eye of the herder. They had lost all awareness, and I knew I could not help them. With a heavy heart, I silently bid them farewell and turned away. Feeling alone and afraid, I continued my journey, gathering what food I could find to sustain myself. Eventually, I reached a grove of pepper trees where I encountered some people harvesting the berries. They seemed friendly, so I revealed myself to them. Surprised to see me, they asked who I was and how I had come to be there. I told them of the shipwreck and the dangers I had faced. They were amazed at my escape and welcomed me warmly, offering me nourishing food, the best I had tasted in days. Grateful for their kindness, I rested and regained my strength. When their work was done at sunset, they invited me to join them on their boat. We sailed to their nearby island, where they brought me before their king. He listened intently as I recounted my adventures since leaving Baghdad. Impressed by my story, he invited me to dine with him, and I gladly accepted, for I was in need of good food and company. Over time, I gained favor with the king. I noticed that his people rode horses without saddles, and I mentioned how saddles could provide greater comfort and control. Intrigued, the king asked me to make one. With the help of his best carpenter and blacksmith, I designed a saddle covered in fine leather and stuffed with soft wool. I added stirrups and girths, and we decorated it with beautiful fringes and trimmings. When I presented it to the king, he was delighted. He mounted his horse and was overjoyed at how comfortable it felt. In gratitude, he rewarded me generously. Soon, the nobles of the court requested saddles of their own. Working with the craftsmen, I spent many days making saddles for them, which earned me both wealth and respect. I became well established in the land, and the king honored me greatly. One day, the king approached me with a proposal. "My friend," he said, "you have become like one of us, and we do not wish to part with you. I would like you to marry a woman of high standing here, someone with beauty and grace, so you may settle among us and be happy." Honored but surprised, I hesitated. Seeing my reluctance, the king encouraged me, saying, "Do not refuse me. This will bind you more closely to us, and you will receive every good thing at my hands." Realizing that this alliance would secure my position and perhaps bring me happiness, I agreed. The marriage was arranged, and I wed a woman of great beauty and kindness. She brought with her a generous dowry, and the king gifted us a magnificent house with servants. We lived happily, and I felt content in my new home, forgetting the perils I had previously faced. However, fate had other plans. A friend of mine lost his wife, and I went to offer my condolences. I said, "Take heart, my brother. Perhaps you will find happiness again." But he continued to weep, saying, "How can I hope for that when today I will be buried with my wife?" Shocked, I asked, "What do you mean?" He explained, "In our custom, when a spouse dies, the surviving partner is buried alive with them, so neither has to live alone." Hearing this, I was filled with dread. I asked, "Does this custom apply to everyone, even strangers like me?" He nodded, and my heart sank. I hoped that I would never have to face such a fate. Despite trying to distract myself, the fear stayed with me. Soon after, my own wife fell ill and passed away. The king and the people came to offer their sympathies, not only for her death, but also for the fate that awaited me. Despite my protests and pleas for mercy, they insisted that I follow their tradition. They prepared my wife's body, adorning her with fine garments and jewels. Then they led us to a mountainside, where a deep pit served as the burial place. They lowered her body into the pit and turned to me. They gave me a small jug of water and 7 pieces of bread. Despite my desperate appeals, they lowered me into the pit beside her. Above, they sealed the opening with a large stone, leaving me in darkness. Surrounded by the remains of others who had shared this fate, I felt despair like never before. Determined to survive, I rationed my food and water. In the darkness, I explored the cavern, stumbling over bones and debris. After some time, I heard the sound of the stone being moved above. Another funeral was taking place. A deceased man was lowered into the cavern, followed by his living wife, who was weeping and lamenting her fate. Once the opening was sealed again, I heard her cry out, "If only someone could help me end this suffering." Moved by her plea and wanting to ease her pain, I approached her. Using a sturdy bone as a weapon, I ended her life swiftly. I took the food and water that had been given to her and returned to my resting place. This grim event happened several times as more people were brought into the cavern. Each time, I repeated the act, sustaining myself with the provisions left for them. Time passed slowly, and I grew weary of this existence. One day, I heard noises at the far end of the cavern. Investigating, I saw a small creature, perhaps a wild animal, that fled upon seeing me. Noticing that it had entered through a tiny opening that let in a glimmer of light, hope surged within me. I made my way toward the light, clambering over rocks and squeezing through tight spaces. Eventually, I forced my way through the opening and emerged onto the side of the mountain overlooking the sea. The fresh air filled my lungs, and I thanked the heavens for my escape. Now free but stranded, I survived by collecting jewels and valuables that had been buried with the dead and by gathering food from the seashore. One day, as I gazed out to sea, I spotted a passing ship. Waving my arms and shouting, I managed to catch their attention. A small boat came ashore, and the sailors were astonished to find me there. "Who are you, and how did you come to be here?" they asked. I told them my story, and they were amazed at my survival. The captain welcomed me aboard, and we set sail. As we traveled, I traded some of the jewels I had gathered, rebuilding my wealth. Eventually, we reached Basra, and from there, I returned to Baghdad. Back home, I reunited with my family and friends, grateful for my safety and the comforts of home. I shared my incredible experiences with them, and they marveled at the adventures I had survived. Despite all I had endured, the desire for exploration still lingered in my heart. These are the experiences of my fourth voyage. If you wish, I will share the even more remarkable tales of my fifth voyage with you tomorrow. After returning safely to Baghdad and enjoying a period of comfort and luxury, I found myself reminiscing about my past adventures. The dangers and hardships seemed distant, overshadowed by the excitement and wealth they had brought me. I thought, a man truly understands the world by exploring its farthest corners. I also had the idea to own my own ship, believing it would increase my gains and give me greater freedom. Determined, I left my life of ease and journeyed to Basra with many valuable goods. There, I found a splendid ship for sale. I purchased it, hired a skilled captain and crew, and invited other merchants to join me. We loaded our cargo and set sail, visiting many islands and trading wherever we went. One day, we arrived at a large, uninhabited island. While I was busy with matters on the ship, some of the merchants went ashore. Later, they returned carrying large pieces of meat, their faces filled with excitement. "What have you found?" I asked them. "You won't believe it," one of them exclaimed. "We discovered a giant egg unlike anything we've ever seen. We couldn't resist. We broke it open and found this enormous bird inside. Look at the size of these meat slabs." A feeling of dread washed over me. "Did you say a giant egg?" I asked urgently. "Yes," another merchant replied. "It was enormous. We've never seen anything like it." I realized they had disturbed the egg of the roc, the colossal bird I had encountered on a previous voyage. "You have brought disaster upon us," I exclaimed. "The mother bird will surely seek revenge when she finds her young ones slain. She may destroy our ship." But they laughed it off. "You're worrying too much, Sindbad," they said. "It's just a bird." "No," I insisted. "You don't understand the danger. We must leave immediately." Sensing my seriousness, the captain ordered everyone back on board. We set sail as quickly as possible, hoping to distance ourselves from the island. For a moment, it seemed we might escape unscathed. Suddenly, the sky darkened. Looking up, we saw the enormous roc descending upon us, its massive wings blotting out the sun. It let out a terrifying screech that echoed across the sea. Soon, another roc joined it, and together they circled above us, their cries filling us with dread. "Brace yourselves," the captain shouted. We watched in horror as the birds each picked up a huge boulder from the island with their powerful talons. One of the rocs flew directly above us and released its boulder. We held our breath as it plummeted toward us, but by some miracle, it missed the ship by a narrow margin, crashing into the sea behind us. The impact caused a gigantic wave that lifted our ship high into the air and then dropped us down with tremendous force. The second roc then released its boulder, This time, fate was not on our side. The massive rock struck the ship directly, shattering it and sending us all into the sea. Amid screams and chaos, we were thrown into the water, struggling for our lives. In the midst of the turmoil, I clung to a piece of floating wood. The sea tossed me about, and I fought to keep my head above water. Eventually, exhausted, I lost consciousness. When I awoke, I found myself washed ashore on an unfamiliar island. The sun was warm, and the sound of gentle waves filled the air. Grateful to be alive, I thanked the heavens for my survival. I explored the island, finding fruits and fresh water to restore my strength. As I walked along a stream, I noticed an elderly man sitting by the bank. He had flowing silver hair and a long white beard, and he wore garments made from leaves. He seemed gentle and frail. I approached him cautiously. "Peace be upon you," I said. "Do you live here?" He looked up at me but said nothing. Instead, he gestured to his mouth and shook his head, indicating that he could not speak. Then he pointed to the other side of the stream and motioned as if asking for help to cross. Understanding his request, I smiled. "Would you like me to carry you across?" I offered. He nodded eagerly. I knelt down, allowing him to climb onto my back. He wrapped his legs around my neck, and I stood up carefully. Though he was light, his grip was surprisingly strong. I waded across the stream and reached the other side. "There we are," I said cheerfully. "You can get down now." But instead of releasing me, he tightened his legs around my neck. "You can let go," I repeated, trying to pry his legs apart. His grip only grew stronger. I began to feel uneasy. "Sir, please get down," I insisted. He remained silent, his expression unchanged. I tried to force him off, but he clung to me like a vice. Then he kicked his heels against my sides, urging me to walk forward. "What's the meaning of this?" I exclaimed, but he only kicked harder. Realizing I couldn't remove him by force, I decided to comply for the moment. Perhaps he would tire and release me later. I walked wherever he directed, hoping for an opportunity to escape. Day turned into night, and still he remained on my back. Exhausted, I tried to rest, but he would not allow it, beating me whenever I slowed down. My back ached, and my spirit waned. This can't go on, I thought. I must find a way to rid myself of this old man. One day, while walking through a grove of pumpkin plants, I had an idea. I said aloud, "These pumpkins look ripe and delicious." The old man showed interest, tapping my shoulder and pointing at the pumpkins. I picked several and sat down, pretending to eat. Secretly, I carved out one of the pumpkins, removing the seeds and filling it with grape juice I had collected earlier. I sealed it and let it ferment in the sun. Later, I opened the pumpkin and took a long drink, acting as if it was the most delightful beverage. I began to sing and sway, pretending to be intoxicated. The old man watched me curiously and gestured for the pumpkin. "You want some?" I asked, handing it to him. He took it eagerly and drank deeply. The fermented juice quickly affected him. He began to laugh and loosened his grip around my neck. Feeling his hold weaken, I seized the moment. Summoning all my strength, I grabbed his legs and threw him off my shoulders. He fell to the ground, dazed. Free at last, I stood over him. "You won't torment anyone else," I declared. To ensure he couldn't harm me again, I picked up a large stone and ended his life. Relieved and overjoyed, I stretched and breathed deeply. "Thank the heavens," I sighed. "I'm finally free." A few days later, a ship arrived at the island. I signaled to them, and a boat was sent to shore. The sailors were surprised to see me. "Who are you?" one of them asked. "How did you come to be here?" I told them of my shipwreck and the ordeal with the old man. One of the sailors exclaimed, "You encountered the old man of the sea. Many have fallen victim to him, but none have escaped until now. He's known as a menace to travelers," another added. "You're fortunate to have survived." They brought me aboard, and the captain welcomed me kindly. As we sailed, we visited various ports, trading goods along the way. One day, we arrived at an island with a bustling city. I learned that this place was known as the City of the Apes. Curious, I asked one of the locals about it. "Why is it called the City of the Apes?" I inquired. "At night," he explained, "large apes descend from the mountains and overrun the city. They can be aggressive and dangerous. To stay safe, we leave the city each evening and spend the night on boats anchored offshore." "That's remarkable," I said. "Be sure to join us tonight," he advised. "It's not safe to remain in the city after dark." "I will gratefully do so, my friend," I told him. I thanked the sailors that had brought me to this curious city and wished them farewell as they set sail. As the sun started setting, I followed the townspeople to the boats. We sailed a short distance from shore and spent the night safely on the water. From the boat, I could see the apes swarming into the city, their silhouettes moving through the streets. The next morning, we returned to the city. I noticed that the people began gathering stones and placing them in bags. Curious, I asked, "What are you doing with those stones?" "Come with us," one of them said with a smile. They led me to a valley filled with tall coconut trees. High above, monkeys rested among the branches, too high for us to reach. The people began throwing stones at the monkeys. Agitated, the monkeys started throwing coconuts down at us. "This is how we collect coconuts," my companion explained, dodging a falling coconut. I joined in, and soon we had gathered a large number of coconuts. I realized that this was a valuable commodity. Over the next few days, I helped the locals and amassed a significant supply of coconuts. I decided to trade these coconuts for goods. When a ship arrived, I negotiated with the merchants on board. They agreed to purchase my stock at a good price. With the proceeds, I bought spices, rare woods, and other valuable items. As we sailed towards home, we stopped at various islands known for their unique products. On one island, we found cinnamon and pepper. On another, we traded for precious pearls. At each stop, I traded wisely, increasing my wealth. One day, as we sailed near a beautiful island, I noticed something unusual. "Look at those pepper plants," I pointed out to a fellow merchant. "They have large leaves hanging over the pepper clusters." "Yes," he replied. "When the sun shines, the leaves hang down. When it rains, they lift up to cover the pepper. Nature provides for its own." I marveled at the wonders of the world. Eventually, we reached Basra, and from there, I returned to Baghdad. Back home, I reunited with my family and friends. I shared my adventures with them, and they were amazed by my tales. Surrounded by comfort and happiness, I resumed my life, grateful for the experiences and lessons I had learned. Yet the call of the sea and the promise of new adventures still whispered to me. This is the story of my 5th voyage. If you wish, I will share the even more remarkable adventures of my 6th voyage with you tomorrow. After some time living peacefully in Baghdad, surrounded by comfort and friends, I found myself once again longing for adventure. One day, as I sat in my garden, a group of merchants visited me. They shared tales of their recent travels, of distant lands, exotic goods, and thrilling experiences. Their stories stirred something deep within me. "I thought you had sworn off voyaging, Sindbad," one of them remarked. "I did," I replied, "but hearing your stories reminds me of the wonders I've seen and the treasures I've found. Perhaps one more journey wouldn't hurt." Despite having told myself I would never set sail again, I couldn't resist the call of the sea. I gathered a collection of valuable goods and traveled to Basra, where I found a ship preparing to depart. Along with other esteemed merchants, I boarded, and we set sail with high hopes. Our voyage began smoothly. We visited various ports, traded goods, and enjoyed each other's company. But one day, the captain approached us with a grave expression. "My friends," he said, "I fear we've lost our course. The maps and stars do not match our surroundings." We gathered around him, concern etched on our faces. "What do you mean?" I asked. "We've sailed into unknown waters," he replied. "I don't recognize these seas. We must be cautious." As days passed, an uneasy feeling settled over us. Then a sudden, fierce wind struck our ship. Before we could react, the sails were torn and the rudder snapped. Helpless, we were driven toward a towering mountain that seemed to rise straight into the sky. "Hold on!" the captain shouted as the ship crashed against the rocky cliffs. The vessel shattered under the force, and many of my companions were lost to the merciless sea. Clinging to pieces of wreckage, a few of us managed to scramble onto the rocks. Exhausted and shaken, we thanked the heavens for our survival. Once the tide receded, we climbed down to a stretch of shoreline. There we were astonished to find the remnants of countless shipwrecks scattered along the coast. Precious goods, chests of treasures, and pieces of broken ships lay strewn about. "Look at all this wealth," one of my companions marveled. "Indeed," I said, "but it seems we're not the first to suffer this fate." As we explored further, we discovered something extraordinary. A spring flowing with a fragrant substance. It gave off a scent like sweet musk, filling the air around us. "What is this?" another asked, intrigued. I examined it closely. "This must be ambergris," I explained. "Ambergris," they echoed. "Yes," I continued. "It's a rare and valuable substance formed in the intestines of whales. When whales eat certain things in the ocean, it can irritate their stomachs. To ease this discomfort, they produce ambergris, which they eventually expel into the sea. Over time, it washes ashore in solid chunks. It's used in perfumes and is worth a fortune." They looked at the spring in amazement. "But this is a flowing source." "Exactly," I said. "This must be a place where ambergris originates before it reaches the sea." Excited by our find, we collected as much ambergris as we could, along with other treasures from the wreckage. We also found barrels of preserved food, which kept us from starving. However, our relief was short-lived. One by one, my companions fell ill with a strange fever. Despite my efforts to care for them, they all passed away, leaving me alone on the desolate island. Despair settled over me. Am I destined to die here as well? I wondered aloud. With no one left to bury me when my time came, I decided to prepare my own grave. On the shore, I dug a resting place, thinking that when I died, the sands would cover me. But as days passed, I refused to surrender to hopelessness. I must find a way off this island, I resolved. While exploring, I came across a river that emerged from one side of the mountain and disappeared into another. An idea sparked in my mind. Perhaps this river flows to an inhabited land, I thought. If I build it, I might follow it to safety. Using wood from the wreckage and ropes, I constructed a sturdy raft, careful to make it narrow enough to navigate the river's passage. I loaded it with the treasures I had gathered, the ambergris, precious gems, and valuable goods. Either I find salvation, I said to myself, or I meet my end trying. With a deep breath, I set off, allowing the current to carry me into the mountain's dark tunnel. Inside, complete darkness enveloped me. I lay flat on the raft to avoid hitting my head on the cavern roof, gripping the sides tightly. The sound of rushing water echoed around me. At times, the space felt vast. At others, it narrowed and I feared being crushed. Overwhelmed by fear and exhaustion, I eventually lost consciousness. When I awoke, I felt warm sunlight on my face and heard birds singing. Opening my eyes, I found myself on a calm river, surrounded by lush greenery. My raft was tied to the riverbank, and a group of people stood nearby, watching me with curiosity. One of them spoke to me, but I couldn't understand their language. I shook my head, trying to convey my confusion. Then a man stepped forward and greeted me in Arabic. "Peace be upon you, brother," he said with a smile. "Peace be upon you," I replied, relief flooding over me. "Thank you for rescuing me." "You are welcome," he said. "We found you drifting on the river and brought you ashore. You seem weary." "I am," I admitted. "I've been through a harrowing ordeal." He offered me food and water, which I accepted gratefully. As I regained my strength, I recounted my journey, the shipwreck, the island of treasures, the loss of my companions, and my perilous passage through the mountain river. The man translated my story to the others, who listened in amazement. "You must come with us to meet our king," he said. "He will want to hear your tale." They helped me gather my belongings from the raft and led me to their city. It was a place of great beauty and splendor. Soon I stood before their ruler, the king of Serendib. "Welcome, traveler," the king said in flawless Arabic. "I am eager to hear your story." I bowed respectfully. "Your Majesty, I am Sindbad the Sailor. I come from Baghdad, and I have much to tell." He listened attentively as I recounted my adventures. When I finished, he remarked, "You have endured incredible hardships and shown great courage. Fate has brought you safely to us." "Thank you, Your Majesty," I replied. "I am grateful for your kindness." In appreciation, I offered him gifts from my collection, the finest ambergris, precious jewels, and rare spices. The king accepted them graciously. "These are wonderful treasures," he said. "You shall be honored in my court." For some time, I lived in Serendib, enjoying the hospitality of the king and his people. The land was rich and abundant, with equal hours of day and night throughout the year. The sun rose and set swiftly, painting the skies with brilliant colors. Mountains glittered with precious stones, and the air was filled with the scent of exotic spices. One day, as I stood atop a high hill overlooking the sea, a longing stirred within me. As beautiful as this land is, I mused, I miss my home in Baghdad. That evening, I approached the king. "Your Majesty," I began, "you have been most generous to me, but I wish to return to my homeland." He looked at me thoughtfully. "We will be sad to see you go, Sindbad," he said. "But I understand the call of one's own country." He agreed to let me depart and provided me with valuable gifts for my journey. As we prepared my departure, he handed me a letter written on fine parchment. "I have a favor to ask," he said. "Would you deliver this letter and gift to your ruler, the Caliph Harun al-Rashid?" "It would be my honor," I replied. The letter read, "From the King of Serendib to the Caliph of Baghdad. Peace be upon you. Though we are separated by great distance, we share a bond of friendship. I send you this humble gift, hoping it pleases you. May peace and prosperity be with you." Along with the letter, He sent a magnificent goblet, carved from a single ruby, adorned with diamonds and pearls, a truly royal gift. I bid farewell to the king and his court, and embarked on a ship bound for Basra. The journey was smooth, and soon I arrived back in my beloved Baghdad. Without delay, I sought an audience with the caliph. When I presented the letter and the goblet, he was greatly pleased. "This is a remarkable gift," the caliph exclaimed, admiring the goblet. "Tell me, Sindbad, about this king of Serendib." I described the splendor of Serendib, the richness of the land, the wisdom of the king, and the wonders I had seen. "The king sits upon a grand throne atop a majestic elephant," I explained. "He is surrounded by his nobles, each mounted on their own elephants, and attended by thousands of horsemen clad in silk and gold. A herald walks before him, proclaiming his greatness, while another follows, reminding all that even kings are mortal." The caliph nodded thoughtfully. "Truly, he is a powerful and wise ruler," he said. "I am pleased to hear of his friendship." He rewarded me generously for my service and said, "Rest now, Sindbad. You have earned it." Returning home, I settled back into my life, grateful for my experiences and the comforts of home. I told my friends and family of my adventures, and they marveled at the tales. Yet, as always, the allure of the sea and the unknown lingered in my heart. This is the story of my 6th voyage. If you wish, I will share the incredible events of my 7th and final voyage with you tomorrow. After returning from my 6th voyage, I was resolute in my decision never to set sail again. The perils I had faced were enough for a lifetime, and I was content to spend my days in the peace and comfort of Baghdad. Surrounded by friends and the pleasures of home, I often reflected, "Here I am, in the abode of peace, and praise be to God, I shall never leave it again, for the dangers that lurk beyond." One sunny afternoon, I sat in my garden, enjoying the tranquility. A royal messenger approached me. "Sindbad," he said, "the Caliph Harun al-Rashid summons you to his palace." Surprised, I asked, "Do you know why the Caliph wishes to see me?" "I am merely the messenger," he replied with a respectful bow. Though curious and a bit apprehensive, I quickly prepared myself and followed him to the grand palace. Entering the opulent hall, I bowed deeply before the Caliph. "Peace be upon you, Sindbad," the Caliph greeted warmly. "And upon you peace, O commander of the faithful," I replied. He gestured for me to rise. "I have a matter of great importance that requires your unique talents," he said. "Your Majesty," I said cautiously, "I am your humble servant." He smiled. "I wish you to deliver a letter and a gift to the king of Serendib. Your previous journey to his land and your esteemed reputation make you the perfect envoy." A knot formed in my stomach at the thought of another voyage. "May I speak freely, Your Majesty?" I asked. "Of course," he nodded. "I have sworn never to set foot on a ship again," I began. "The sea has brought me nothing but hardship and peril. The mere thought of traveling fills me with dread." The Caliph leaned forward, concern evident in his eyes. "Surely your experiences cannot have been so terrible," he said. "Your Majesty, with your permission, I will recount my voyages so you may understand my hesitation." "Please do," he encouraged. I took a deep breath. Yes, on my first voyage, I was stranded on what I thought was an island, but it turned out to be the back of a giant sleeping whale. When it dove into the depths, I barely escaped with my life. He raised an eyebrow. "That is indeed astonishing." "On my second voyage," I continued, I encountered the giant rock and was trapped in the Valley of Diamonds surrounded by serpents. I only escaped by a stroke of luck, using the merchant's trick of attaching myself to a piece of meat so the rock would carry me out. The Caliph nodded thoughtfully. A clever move. My third voyage saw me facing cannibals and the horrifying old man of the sea who clung to my back and nearly enslaved me until I found a way to outwit him. He shook his head in amazement. Your tales are beyond belief. I recounted my fourth and fifth voyages, the shipwrecks, the giant snakes, and the dangerous encounters with monstrous creatures. I spoke of the sixth voyage, where I was stranded on a desolate island and narrowly escaped death by discovering a river that led me to safety. By Allah, Sindbad, the Caliph exclaimed, you have faced more perils than any man I know. Indeed, Your Majesty, I said earnestly. This is why I'm reluctant to embark on another journey. He was silent for a moment, contemplating my words. Then he smiled gently. Sindbad, your courage and wisdom are precisely why I need you for this mission. I understand your fears, but I believe fate will favor you this time. Your Majesty, I began, but he raised his hand. I insist, he said kindly. You are the only one I trust to represent me before the King of Serendib. Will you not honor me with this service? Realizing I could not refuse the Caliph's request, I bowed my head. As you wish, O Commander of the Faithful, I will undertake this journey for you. He clapped his hands in approval. Excellent. I have prepared a magnificent gift for the king, along with a letter. You shall depart as soon as you are ready. He presented me with a detailed list of the gifts. A splendid white horse of unparalleled beauty, adorned with a saddle of gold and encrusted with precious jewels, a royal robe of the finest materials, rich fabrics from Egypt and Greece, and an exquisite crystal goblet crafted with such artistry that it seemed almost magical. These are treasures worthy of a king, I remarked. Indeed, the Caliph agreed, and the letter expresses my deepest respect and desire for continued friendship. I accepted the responsibility with a mixture of honor and trepidation. Preparations were made swiftly, and soon I found myself once again aboard a ship. Setting sail from Basra, the journey to Serendib was blessedly uneventful. Upon arrival, I was warmly welcomed by the king, who remembered me from my previous visit. Sindbad, he exclaimed, embracing me. It does my heart good to see you again. Your Majesty, I replied with a bow, I bring greetings and gifts from the Caliph Harun al-Rashid. I presented the letter and the splendid gifts. The king was delighted, marveling at the beauty of the horse and the craftsmanship of the goblet. The Caliph honors me greatly, he said. Please convey my deepest gratitude when you return. For several days, I enjoyed the king's hospitality. We dined together, exchanged stories, and strengthened the bonds between our nations. One evening, as we strolled through the palace gardens, the king asked, Tell me, Sindbad, do you ever tire of your travels? I smiled wryly. To be honest, Your Majesty, I had hoped my traveling days were over, but duty called me back to the sea. He nodded understandingly. I can see the weariness in your eyes. Perhaps after this journey, you can find the peace you seek. I hope so, I said softly. When the time came to depart, the king bestowed upon me additional gifts for the Caliph and wished me a safe journey. May the winds be ever in your favor, he said. Thank you, Your Majesty. May peace and prosperity continue to bless your land. After we set sail from Serendib, the journey seemed blessed by fortune. The skies were clear, and the sea was calm, a rarity that I did not take for granted after my many encounters with treacherous waters. We sailed for days without trouble, and my heart even began to lighten with hope. Perhaps this journey, unlike the others, would pass uneventfully. Alas, such thoughts were fleeting. It was one morning at dawn, as the mist still lay thick over the ocean, that the lookout's cry pierced the quiet. He had spotted sails, many sails, approaching from the west. Within moments, it became clear that they were not friendly traders. The black flags and the frantic shouts of my crew left no doubt we were being pursued by pirates. A chase began. Our captain ordered full sails, but the pirate fleet was swift, their ships sleek and built for speed. They closed in on us before noon. As they surrounded us, the reality of our situation settled over me like a heavy shroud. We were outnumbered and outmatched. There was no escaping their grasp. The pirates boarded our vessel with ruthless efficiency, their faces obscured by scarves, their eyes cold and calculating. My men and I fought back as best we could, but our resistance was in vain. The clash of steel, the cries of fear, and the chaos of the battle were soon replaced by silence, the grim silence of defeat. Bound and kneeling on deck, we watched helplessly as they seized our cargo, stripping the ship of all its wealth. They gave us little regard beyond determining our value as prisoners. One by one, we were appraised, rough hands pulling us to our feet, turning us this way and that like cattle in a market. The pirates spoke in a language I could barely understand, but their intentions needed no translation. We were to be sold, slaves to the highest bidder. After days aboard the pirate ship, they made port at a desolate island, a place with no name. The air was thick with humidity, and the settlement was nothing more than a scattering of makeshift huts, but it bustled with traders and buyers, each as unscrupulous as the pirates themselves. We were marched off the ship and lined up for auction, the ropes cutting into our wrists. There, under the scorching sun, I stood among other unfortunate souls, awaiting my destiny. A wealthy man with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor approached the slave traders. His attire was simple yet elegant, and he carried himself with a quiet confidence. "Who is this man?" he asked, gesturing toward me. "A recent acquisition," the slave trader replied. "Strong and healthy, suitable for various tasks." The man looked at me thoughtfully. "What is your name?" he inquired. "I am Sindbad of Baghdad," I answered, meeting his gaze. He seemed intrigued. "You do not appear to be an ordinary slave." "I was once a merchant," I explained, "but misfortune has brought me here." After a moment of contemplation, he nodded. "I will purchase him." The transaction was completed, and he led me away from the market. As we walked through the streets, I couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. My new master did not seem cruel. Perhaps my fortunes were beginning to change. Upon arriving at his spacious home, he turned to me. "My name is Al-Musin," he said. "I hope you will find comfort in my household." "Thank you, master," I replied respectfully. He shook his head lightly. "There's no need to call me master. You may address me as Al-Musin. You must be hungry and tired. Come inside." He provided me with clean clothing, a warm meal, and a place to rest. His servants attended to my needs with courtesy. That evening, as I sat in the comfortable quarters assigned to me, I marveled at his kindness. The next day, he summoned me to his study. Shelves lined the walls, filled with scrolls and artifacts from distant lands. He gestured for me to sit. "Tell me, Sindbad," he began, "what skills do you possess? Are you trained in any art or craft?" "I have experience in commerce," I replied. I am skilled in buying and selling goods. Almusian smiled slightly. While trade is valuable, I was hoping for something more specific. Can you wield a weapon? Perhaps you have skills in hunting or archery? Yes, I said. I am proficient with the bow and arrow. It was a pastime in my youth, and I have maintained my skill over the years. His eyes lit up with interest. Excellent. Would you be willing to demonstrate your abilities? Of course, I agreed. He led me to a spacious courtyard where targets had been set up at varying distances. Handing me a finely crafted bow and a quiver of arrows, he stepped back to observe. I took a deep breath, feeling the familiar weight of the bow in my hands. Selecting an arrow, I notched it and drew the string back smoothly. Taking aim at a target 50 paces away, I released the arrow. It flew straight and true, striking the center of the target. Impressive, he remarked. Your aim is exceptional. He pointed to a more distant target. Try that one. I adjusted my stance and focused, compensating for the increased distance. The arrow soared gracefully through the air, once again hitting the mark. My master clapped his hands in approval. You are indeed skilled, Sindbad. I have a proposition for you. I am at your service, I replied, curious about his intentions. In this land, elephants roam the forests, he explained. Their ivory tusks are highly prized, but hunting them is dangerous and requires a skilled archer. If you can assist me in obtaining ivory, I will reward you generously, and perhaps even grant you your freedom. The prospect of earning my freedom filled me with hope. Though the task was perilous, it offered a path back to my former life. I accept your offer, I said with determination. Very good, he responded. We shall begin tomorrow at dawn. That night, I prepared myself mentally for the challenges ahead. The opportunity to regain my freedom fueled my resolve. The next morning before dawn, Al-Musin woke me gently. It's time, he said. We mounted a sturdy elephant and he guided us deep into the forest. The journey was silent, the air cool and filled with the sounds of awakening wildlife. Eventually, we reached a grove of towering trees. This is where you will wait, he instructed. Climb that tree and remain hidden. When the elephants pass below, aim for the largest one. If you succeed in bringing one down, return to me immediately. I climbed the tree, settling among its thick branches. As the first light of dawn filtered through the leaves, I waited, my senses alert. Hours passed before I heard the distant rustling of foliage. A herd of elephants emerged, majestic and powerful. I steadied my breathing, focusing on a large bull elephant that wandered closest to my perch. Drawing the bowstring back, I whispered a silent prayer and released the arrow. It flew true, striking the elephant with lethal precision. The mighty beast let out a thunderous roar before collapsing. The other elephants scattered, and I remained hidden until the area was clear. Climbing down, I ran back to Al-Musin's estate, my heart pounding. Master Al-Musin, I called out upon arrival. I have succeeded. He met me with an eager expression. Tell me what happened. I recounted the events, and he smiled broadly. Well done, Sindbad. I'm sure this is but one of many successful hunts you will conduct in my service. This continued for some time, and I became adept at the task. But one day, the elephant seemed to have had enough. As I prepared to shoot, a massive bull elephant charged toward my tree. Before I could react, it wrapped its trunk around the trunk and uprooted it entirely. I fell to the ground, stunned. The elephant lifted me gently with its trunk and placed me on its back. It then led me deep into the forest, eventually arriving at a vast clearing filled with the bones and tusks of countless elephants, their graveyard. The elephant set me down carefully and looked at me with eyes that seemed full of understanding. Then it turned and left me there. I realized that the elephants wanted me to see this place so I would no longer harm them. Overwhelmed by this revelation, I gathered as many tusks as I could carry and returned to my master. He was astonished by my haul. "This is incredible. Where did you find all this ivory?" I recounted the extraordinary experience. He listened in awe. "The elephant showed you their graveyard? Truly, you are favored by fate." He was so pleased that he granted me my freedom. "You have brought me great wealth," he said. "You are no longer a slave. Go with my blessing." With the ivory and the gold he gave me, I secured passage back to Baghdad. Upon my return, I sought an audience with the caliph. Bowing deeply before him, I said, "O Commander of the Faithful, I have returned from my journey, though it was not without great peril." He looked at me with concern. "Tell me everything, Sindbad." I recounted the successful delivery of his gifts, the warm reception from the king of Serendib, and then the unfortunate encounter with pirates leading to my enslavement. I described the miraculous encounter with the elephants and how it led to my freedom. When I finished, the caliph sat back in his chair, shaking his head in wonder. "Your life is truly a tapestry of marvels and trials," he said. "Your courage and resilience are beyond measure." "Thank you, Your Majesty," I replied humbly. He stood and approached me. "I am grateful for your service and deeply sorry for the hardships you endured on my behalf." "It was my honor to serve you," I assured him. He placed a hand on my shoulder. "From this day forward, you are released from any obligation to journey again. I command that your tales be recorded in letters of gold, so future generations may learn from your experiences." "I am honored by your kindness," I said. The caliph smiled warmly. "May you find peace and happiness in the days to come, Sindbad. You have earned it." As I left the palace, a profound sense of relief and contentment washed over me. My voyaging days were finally at an end,